Jennifer Evans Cowley. I'm a professor of city and regional planning here at Ohio State University. I also serve as our associate dean in the College of Engineering. And as part of my disciplinary studies, I'm very interested in how technology is shaping our cities. So the ways that it helps us in engaging and moving through our cities more efficiently and effectively, but also how we individually interact with our cities and the impacts that technology can have on issues of equity and equality and just quality of life. Well, I think that every technology has positive and negatives. So part of it is how you evaluate the impact on people. And so I have a professional code of ethics that I'm required to follow as part of being a certified planner. And as part of that code of ethics, I'm required to think about the impact of decisions on the community. Makes sense, right? You know, what's the impact of a particular technology or a particular decision going to be when we talk about our communities? And I also have to think about, you know, who are we benefiting, right? So it may be great for a new technology. You, Bob, are going to benefit from that particular technology, but maybe others are going to lose from that. So how do I think about who the public is that's benefiting from whatever this technology is? So I think that's really helpful for me to have the professional code of ethics help guide me in thinking about who benefits and then evaluating and making decisions based on who benefits, who loses, and what's the impact on my overall community. So if I think about particular technologies, I think one that is interesting to me is the idea of electronic money. You know, you probably heard about Bitcoin, you may have heard of mobile money, things like that. So I think about what are the impacts on different communities when we think about mobile money. So in some ways it's great. It provides a tremendous amount of freedom to exchange goods and services and things like that much more easily, broadens the ability for you to be able to make a purchase from someone in China or anywhere around the world. At the same time, you have to have technology and access to technology in order to be able to be part of that marketplace. So what if I'm living in a place in a rural area that doesn't have electricity, that doesn't have internet, that doesn't have access to these things? Then what's the impact? Are we making it easier or harder for people to be able to interact and exchange in the economy? Is this promoting economic development or hindering it and making it more difficult for people to engage in trade? And I don't think there's an easy answer to that. I just watch that particular technology closely to say, hey, there's some tremendous opportunities here to open our global markets, but at the same time, there may be challenges about equality of access to the exchange of funds. It's something I think we have to think about. So I don't think we have to guarantee equality of access to everything. But I think we should be considering that when we're thinking about deploying new technologies.
Okay, well, equality of access, you know, why do you think that's right? I mean, it's kind of nice that like engineers have the professional code of ethics and city and regional planning people do too, which is wonderful that we are to do that, but why do you internally think that this equality issue is right? Because, you know, we see some parts of the world, and that includes the U.S., where people don't really care about equality. They don't think it's necessarily an issue of importance, but I think you do. And where did you learn that? Did you get it from your grandmother?
You know, I'm not sure where I learned it. I think I have a strong internal moral compass, and when I think about the subjects that I've studied in schools and the profession that I've chosen, it's very publicly driven in looking at how can I benefit the people that are around me in my own community. And so I think part of that natural interest and moral compass has led me to believe that I need to be thinking about how everyone will access whatever it is we're talking about and do the best I can to open access to the greatest degree possible. I think in part it has to do with how we learn citizenship and what it means to be a good citizen, that we're taught growing up in the schools here in the United States that it's important for you to help others. And I think that the lessons learned, whether it be picking up trash in a park or volunteering to bake cookies to raise money in the community, whatever it might be, I think those that help instill a sense of citizenship and what it means to be a good neighbor, a good citizen, a good partner in our communities. So I'll use another example,
Okay.
autonomous vehicles. So it's something
Yeah,
that
that's a
we
good
can
one.
see coming, right? So we recognize there's experimentation. It's something that we could project and look at, and there are different projections that say how quickly will autonomous vehicles become something that's part of the mainstream that's adopted. So part of what I see my role is to raise awareness. So you've identified that. So I try to get my colleagues, I've asked them and said, hey, have you heard about this? Have you been reading about it? What do you think that our profession should be doing about this? And most of what I get is, sure, I've heard of an autonomous vehicle, but that's years away. And in my profession, I'm supposed to be planning for 30-year time horizons. A city is not built overnight, it's built over years. And we're supposed to be projecting 30 years out. Well, in 30 years, autonomous vehicles could very much be part of our landscape, right? So the awareness piece, I think, is really key. And then we spend a lot of time in my profession talking about sustainability, something that's probably been raised elsewhere in your class. And when we think about the three legs of sustainability, we think of economy. So what are the economic impacts of autonomous vehicles? What are the environmental impacts of autonomous vehicles? And then what are the equity impacts? And so I see some really exciting things. So if I imagine an alternative future, and this is just my imagination, right? I say, wow, we're going to have vastly different needs, and we could see very positive environmental impacts on the one hand, because we won't need as much impervious surface. That is, we won't need as many parking lots and other things, because you won't have your individual car that's sitting empty 23 hours a day, Bob. You're going to be using a car that will come and get you when you need to go places, and maybe you'll be using a car an hour a day, and other people will be using your car when they need to, and you'll be sharing this car. And so I see positive potential impacts there. Reduce traffic congestion, things like that. But on the flip side, I say, well, will people choose to be in individual vehicles more often, right? Because now it's so convenient. Someone will come immediately pick you up and drive you. Maybe you'll choose to walk less, bike less, ride the bus less. And this is still an environmentally negative impact if people are using vehicles all the time. So those are kind of pros and cons on the environmental side. On the equity side, I think, okay, well, if more and more people shift to autonomous vehicles, that's good. It reduces the overall cost of ownership of a vehicle, or you may not have to own a vehicle, right? So your cost of transportation, when you think about insurance and fuel and ownership of a vehicle that you don't use very much, wow, that would be great. Middle class people would really have a positive impact on their income. But if we're going to shift more and more, it means that people of low incomes, are they going to be able to afford to access that vehicle, right? And so, the pros and cons, it depends on how we design the system. How are we designing our overall transportation system to recognize and plan for this new type of transportation, right? So we may need more places where people can pull off and be dropped off easily. But then how are we going to ensure equitable access? Are we going to treat it as if it's public transportation and provide a subsidy that will allow people who are lower income to be able to access the transportation? And at this point, I think it's too early to be able to answer all these kinds of questions. But I think it's important to be asking them, raising the awareness, doing the analysis, thinking about what the impacts could be, and then hopefully being part of that system that's making these decisions, right? So I'm not the engineer that's designing the autonomous vehicle, but I'm certainly part of the system in designing the city that will support these autonomous vehicles. And so I would say from my profession's perspective, and my own personal perspective, it's important to follow exactly what you've said. Raise awareness, be part of the analysis, and then be part of the decision making that's happening.